Hi there. I want to make a video about my beliefs with regards to sexuality. Uh, when I talk about sexuality, I'm talking about one's attraction, whether it's to someone of the same sex as yourself or someone of the opposite sex. Um, I made a video a little while ago called "Born This Way?" question mark, which discusses the uh, some music video by um, Lady Gaga, and I go into issues of homosexuality and heterosexuality there, as well as transsexuality. I think this issue is very, very, very important. It's been something that I've looked into a lot in my life, and I've had a lot of questions about, and there aren't a lot of answers, or there are a lot of answers, but um, for me, I've had a religious upbringing in the Unification Church. And in the Unification Church, um, homosexuality is a sin. It is a fallen nature. It is one of the things that have arisen in the nature of people, in the nature of some people, because of the fall of man, as traditionally discussed in the Bible. Um, so I grew up believing that, and I remember when I was about 10 years old, this little girl uh, whipped around in her chair at school and asked me if I was gay. Are you gay? She said it like that, and I was at a real loss as to how to respond to that. Um, and I knew that being gay, well, I believed that being gay was wrong, and I believed that being gay, I couldn't be gay because it was wrong. But the way she asked the question, there wasn't much stimulus that I could see for her asking the question. And it really confused me, and it really put me in a state of unease. And I thought, why would she ask such a thing? Why would, for so many reasons. What did I do that made her think that I was gay? Was one question. Um, and is it so is it so widely believed or widely accepted that there are gay people, being that I was someone who did not believe in homosexuality? And that set me on a course of really looking into this more and more. That was one of my first um, exposures to this debate, this discussion about homosexuality. Later on, fairly quickly, I learned about LGBT. At that time, when I was a kid, uh, there was the movement of LGBT, which stands, of course, for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And I quickly realized that not only is this homosexuality question um, uh, in the minds of many people pretty well um, in the minds of the culture, and the culture was a culture that I was fighting against as a member of the Unification Church, as someone who grew up in the Unification Church. In a way, it was my duty and responsibility to show people the truth, which was the truth of Reverend Sun Myung Moon. And within that truth was, of course, as I said earlier, the idea that we have fallen nature, and one of those fallen natures is homosexuality. Um, uh, and that's one problem of many, of course, as you can imagine. But I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. But as someone in the Unification Church, I was supposed to spread the truth. All right, I think I know where I left off. So when someone was discussing this idea of LGBT, that there are lesbians, there are gay men, and there are transsexual people, and there are people who are bisexual. I felt that it was my duty to expose the fact that that is not true, that there aren't lesbians, that there aren't gay people, that there aren't people who are bisexual, that that is a perversion, and transsexuality is a myth. And so I actively tried to, although it was very hard. I felt wrong many times. I felt threatened also when I would, tell people what I thought, when I would try to express, my beliefs and what I thought was true. And of course, part of that was because I didn't really come from a place of great education, knowing as a fact, having, some kind of special understanding that these things were certainly not true. So the fact that I wasn't very, knowledgeable made it presumptuous of me to discuss, why it's not true and how that could not be true. The issue of homosexuality and those other issues. So um, I I encountered a lot of resistance when I even began to start speaking about my own beliefs. And that caused me to study the issue even more, to perk up when it was being discussed. And of course, in the media, it was a huge thing. And as the media and the Hollywood machine, you could say, was one of the things that we're battling against, um, in the church and movement that I was raised in. Uh, it they this issue of LGBT and homosexuals was lumped in to, oh well, this is just the fallen nature of society today, and of course we can't listen to them. So that was kind of my journey, like 10 years old to 14, 15, and I felt certainly that homosexuality was wrong. Certainly homosexuality was certainly not part of God's design. And then later, I felt as I discovered that there's also this idea of bisexuality and transsexuality, that is even more wrong. It must be wrong. But the way that it was being talked about was that it was supposed to be included. Um, and now this made it hard because there were times where I heard very firm arguments from people who I believed, who said that being gay is being a homosexual. I'm finding it really hard to talk today. This is a hard topic for me. Um, I found many people bringing really good arguments. Well, it's not that the construction of the argument is so good, but it's the experience and the sincerity of the person that comes through in their words, that would convince me that maybe I should take a look at this issue again of homosexuality, being maybe it's not part of man's fallen nature as I thought. Um, that was really hard for me. And what made it harder was this idea that, well, if you accept homosexuality, you also have to accept bisexuality and transsexuality. So that made it hard for me, and that was very, very hard to accept. Whereas homosexuality was somewhat easier to accept, bisexuality and transsexuality was more hard to accept. And I would say that bisexuality was more hard to accept than homosexuality, and transsexuality was even more harder to accept than homosexuality and bisexuality. So even harder because when someone decides to become of a different gender, they start changing their body dramatically, changing their habits and lifestyle dramatically, not just a little bit, and that goes so far as uh, changing physical parts of themselves surgically, which I still feel is wrong. So here I was in my late teens starting to hear very convincing arguments for how homosexuality was completely valid, how that worked with my belief system um, surrounding God, which was very, very important to me, was very um, it was almost impossible for me to put it together because to me my religion informed my faith, informed my relationship with God, which was very important to me. And if you took away my religion, then you took away my ability to reach God at that point. And so um, that was one of the reasons why I became an atheist, which was a very hard and dark time for me. At this point, I wouldn't consider myself an atheist, although I have, sometimes I don't believe in God, certainly. But anyway, I don't remember my time as a strict atheist warmly. I don't have good feelings towards that time. So what I'm saying here is that this whole discussion of homosexuality, that um, it was very hard for me to make a decision on that because I knew that if homosexuality was real, that it must somehow be part of God's plan. Well, then that would directly contradict what I was raised with. Um, and at this point, I have to be honest and say it's really hard for me to put my thoughts together. I have a lot of resistance with this topic. Um, so I apologize for that. Maybe I should stop again. I'm trying to reconstruct the course of my thoughts, and I'm getting kind of long-winded in this video, which I often do, but kind of go into my own history. I'm going to try and bring it really to the point that I wanted to make with this video. Um, when I was around 29, early age 30, I discovered the Divine Truth teachings by a man who claims to be Jesus and his soulmate, Mary Magdalene. There are two people on earth who claim to have reincarnated, and that they are among a very, very few who have managed to do so. In other words, the traditional reincarnation belief is not correct. And he explains that. But in his teachings, he says, as many people will, that he is teaching the truth, that it is God's truth. And God's truth can't be changed. It is immutable. And one thing that he describes is what the soul is. And the soul is something that is created by God, that is who we are, actually, the human beings that are on earth, our souls. And from the soul, you have a spirit body and a physical body. These are two different parts of the soul, you could say. And they are, in a way, transient, and although they are important. And you also have you also have this occurrence of a split in the soul, and this is very important. The soul will split when it, quote, incarnates on the earth. And when it incarnates on the earth, it, at that point, finds a physical body and a spiritual body. So that process is a little bit complicated, and we don't know everything, but that's basically the process. God has created souls. The soul splits into two uh, during the process of incarnation on the earth. Now, when it splits, one part goes into the body of a man, and the other part, as an example, and the other part will go into the body of a woman, or it could first go into the body of a woman, ostensibly, and then go into the other part can go into the body of a man. That is in the case of a heterosexual soul. Now, there is also the case of a female-female homosexual soul and a male-male homosexual soul. In those cases, one part of the soul would split and go into the bodies of a woman, and I'm talking about the spiritual, physical, and the other part would go into the body of another woman, spiritual and physical. And in the case of a man, a man homosexual soul, I should say male, I guess, one part would go into a spiritual and physical body of a man, and the other part would go into the spiritual and physical body of a man that is newly formed for that soul. And so, what this suggests is that not only do you have soulmates, that's very important. In other words, you have someone walking on the earth somewhere or in the spirit world who is your soulmate. And this is someone who God has intended to be your ultimate partner. This is the person with whom you will have the best relationship. And the first thing I wanted to say was the best sex. And I decided to be not so, you know, I didn't want to show my cards that quickly. So I said the best relationship. But I think sex is really important and it is really wonderful and it shouldn't be something that is poo-pooed. Whatever the order is, the best sex, the best relationship, the most love will flow between these two people. Maybe not initially, while you have dark parts, in your soul, but eventually that is the plan. That is God's plan. There are soulmates, and the ultimate relationship you will ever have will be with your soulmate. That doesn't mean that you can't have other relationships, which people do. And a lot of people, of course, are unaware of this fact of there being soulmates. But anyway, as he described this and as I was learning this, it really challenged my beliefs as to, what proper sexuality was. And initially, I just kind of brushed it under the rug because so much of everything else he was saying was amazing. And I didn't really want to look at that too well, but he kept saying it, kept talking about there being homosexual souls as well as heterosexual souls. And it really, began to affect me and really made me look at this again and think again of all the times that I had been, convinced of homosexuality being completely valid. And I began to look into that question more and more as he talked about it. And then he went on to discuss and say that transsexuality is not part of God's plan. In other words, the changing of one's own gender is not a valid thing. It's not an act of kindness to yourself. It's not what God would want for you. And therefore, that could be called, I suppose, a fallen nature or a sinful thing. But of course, we have to understand that the people who wish to do that are probably in great turmoil, as well as he would say, and I would probably say also, being motivated very hard by their environment and also the spirits around them to make that change in themselves. So while I have compassion, and I would recommend that everyone would have compassion for people who have transsexuality, I think that it is important to be firm with the idea that it is not the truth. Now, that is where this issue becomes important. When we discuss the truth, it is important that we know the truth. And I don't feel that I fully know the truth as this man, Jesus, describes it. He says that it is the truth. I have my doubts, but I can believe in it. I have the free will to believe in it, and I do believe in it. And I, in large part, construct my life around these new ideas that I have been, absorbing. And that's anyone's right to do. And I have constructed my own opinions and things like that. A lot of what I do kind of parrot what he says, and that is a bit of an issue. But I am so motivated by this information and inspired by it that I don't feel that it's too bad to parrot it to some extent. So the thing that I want to say to cap this off about homosexuality is that I do really, truly, incredibly so, believe that it is such an important topic. As somebody that did not accept homosexuality, I saw how that worked its, ill effect upon people and how, many times the people that were struggling with their own sexuality in the room, you know, would merely feel or hear, my unacceptance, and maybe I wouldn't say anything, and they would still feel my unacceptance, and it's got to be hard if you are a homosexual man and you feel that you are not accepted, and it's things like that that really made it become important to me to look deeply into this issue and to really take the words of this man, Jesus, to heart and look into it further and further. Because if I am not accepting, and if I am essentially homophobic, which means a fear of or dislike of um, homosexuals, or I should, you know, I really would say also that it's an intolerance of homosexuality, then that is having its effect upon the world. It is having the effect of hurting the opportunities for people who want to explore their sexuality to do so, and to have a loving relationship, because they're not receiving love from me, and I'm a member of this world, and I am, a child of God, and if I berate or chastise or cast doubt onto the sexuality of someone, it does affect them. And as that is the case, I need to address this issue. So I've been recently looking into it a lot, and I've spent a lot of time asking myself whether I'm homosexual or not, actually, as well. Because I know that there are people that, when they are so against an issue, it can kind of reveal the fact that they might have their own issues with it, and actually might be somebody. So, in other words, if I say, no one should ever eat sweets, I eat a lot of sweets, and if I'm so like strong in that point, then it indicates the problem that I have. So if I say homosexuality is a sin, then maybe that is myself, trying to force the issue of my own homosexuality down and to avoid it. And so I looked into that issue very deeply, and I've talked to many friends who are homosexual, and at this point, and I can go into this in another video, I don't believe that I am a homosexual. I really feel that I'm a heterosexual man, and that there is a woman out there for me that God has intended for me. And that actually brings me a lot of joy, and that I look forward to meeting her, and I wish I knew her. But as far as this issue of homosexuality, I believe the truth about this is so important. And to distinguish the truth of there being homosexual people as well as heterosexual people, but not bisexual or transsexual, is so important. I really feel that's very important. For me, as I said earlier, it was such a big question